is, oh, we're just starting recording.
Sorry, I meant to do that from the get-go.
Oh, okay. Most of the survivors we interviewed told us that pornography caused more psychological distress than non-filmed prostitution. I thought I knew something before we did our most recent study, and I learned so much, it was jaw-dropping. Pornography, according to survivors of its production, caused more psychological distress than non-filmed prostitution. They told us porn feels more invasive than prostitution. Porn is more emotionally stressful than prostitution. Pornography is camouflaged as content creation or speech, instead of what it is, a filmed record of prostitution, humiliation, and torture. The retired Nevada FBI agent, Roger Young, said, "Whatever happened to common sense? The fact that there's a camera filming the prostitution doesn't change the fact of the prostitution. Pornography is essentially a crime scene surveillance film. You can't say to someone," Roger told me, "you can't say to someone, hey, let's go rob a bank, but if we film it, then it won't be robbery." Porn pimps are not usually named pimps or traffickers, although that's what they do. They're called managers, protectors, boyfriends, distributors, girlfriends, husbands, partners. And what porn pimps do, and every pimp today is a porn pimps increase profits when they can artificially segregate an arm of the sex trade, such as pornography. Sex trade promoters, and there are many of those sex trade promoters right now at the Commission on the Status of Women in the UN. Their voices are loud and demanding. These people de-link pornography and prostitution. Why? Because the compartmentalization provides legal protections and increases profits. Here's a recent example of how a porn pimp did just that. In 2021, a Swedish woman had the courage to report to the police that she'd been pimped into prostitution and that she'd been raped many times. The woman had gone with her pimp to the home of a sex buyer, and the sex buyer paid the pimp for the session with the woman. The pimp filmed the session, explaining to both the sex buyer and the woman who was paid for, quote, "If you film, you are not buying a whore, you are producing a movie." Like other pimps, he wanted to maximize his profits, so he filmed the rapes and the abuse in order to make more money. The 49-year-old pimp was convicted of rape and trafficking and sent to prison. Then the pimp appealed the court's decision. The pimp and his attorney convinced the Swedish appeals court that he was not a pimp, but instead a pornographer. The rape and pimping charges against him were dropped in 2022. The implication of this legal decision is so clear, don't you think? If a pimp wants to avoid being charged with the crime of rape and trafficking under Sweden's current laws, all he has to do is film his crimes. At that point, the crimes will be named pornography and declared to be protected speech. So we wanted to learn more from survivors. And we did a research study over the course of 3 years. We interviewed 105 women and some men in Sweden using psych tests and open-ended questions. We did these interviews in person, and each one lasted 2 to 3 hours. My co-researchers were Erica Bergquist, Merle Aspegard, Johanna Petrus, Michaela Lannergren, Luba Fine, and Nassima Jarari. Here's a few of our findings from the research, starting with the crucial issue of consent. We know that 84% of the time, adult women in prostitution or pornography are under pimp or third-party control. 84% of the time, they're controlled by pimps. This is adult women, not kids. Consent is not possible under these kind of conditions of coercive control. The 105 research interviewees in Sweden also told us that 64% of them told us that their prostitution was filmed without their consent. One woman said, "You never know when you're selling sex if you're being filmed." Our interviewees' boundaries were routinely overridden with respect to what sex act was agreed to or not, how long the session would last, and whether or not they agreed to have their prostitution filmed. One woman explained, "When it comes to porn, a lot of people think there will be a studio, but it could just as well be filmed abuse. The viewer will never know. The viewer can never know if there's a consent. And even if there was a consent," she told us, "the consequences are still there." And by the way, just to mention here that most of us, in addition to not paying enough attention to the issue of pornography production and what happens to the woman used in and exploited and raped in the production of porn, we don't focus on that enough. We're mostly focusing on broad social harms to boys and men who are learning about sex from porn. That's important, but it's equally important to me how survivors are harmed in the production of it. And one of the ways they're harmed is through the involvement of organized crime. In Sweden, 25% of our interviewees named the international gangs who were involved in their porn production. These included Hells Angels, Bandidos, Original Gangsters, and the Romanian and Nigerian mafias. What kinds of emotional distress are caused by porn production? Only 6% of the general population will have PTSD in their lifetime. 6%. In this research, 81%, an extremely high rate of PTSD, 81% of our interviewees met criteria for a PTSD diagnosis. Dissociation is another symptom of PTSD, and it's a response to overwhelming traumatic events. It helps people cope with uncontrollable and unbearable human cruelty. Dissociation is a survival technique, one woman explains. So it makes it so you feel nothing, so you're not there, or just shut down. And dissociation happens during the stress suffered by prisoners of war who are tortured, children who are being raped, and dissociation happens when women are battered, raped, or prostituted. Many of our interviewees said it was necessary to dissociate in order to survive the experience of porn production. If women did not dissociate while making porn, they felt overwhelmed with disgust, shame, anxiety, and fear. One woman explained, "It's so much dissociation. It's like I'm completely gone while doing porn. And then I come back half an hour later, but I don't even remember what I filmed. It's like a different world." So in conclusion, what I would say is that the camera has become a legally fetishized object. And the camera somehow magically transforms acts of contempt and violence against women into a pimp's free speech. 30 years ago, attorney Sarah Garb noted, quote, prostitution behind a camera is still prostitution. And she said that with minimal modifications currently existing laws, rather than profiting from exploitation and trafficking, porn pimps could be penalized for it. So I would say, and I know we all agree that it's long past time to end porn pimps and pornography sex buyers get out of jail free pass. We need to end their impunity for producing and exploiting the filmed abuse of women and men in the sex trade. Pornography can be understood as a peculiar kind of prostitution that's a result of technological advances. Porn producers, agents, managers, and distributors can all be prosecuted for pimping right now under an abolitionist prostitution law like the one introduced by Sweden. Holding the pornography sex buyer criminally accountable requires a different legal approach from prosecuting pimps and traffickers. Porn sex buyers can be held accountable not under criminal, but under civil laws that could function as an adjunct to the abolitionist prostitution law like Sweden's. Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon proposed compensatory damages for women who prove harm caused by pornography. And we should do another session, Sharon, talking about the fabulous lawsuits that are going on in many countries against specifically documenting and proving to courts the kinds of harms that pornography produces. They're wonderful. Pornography is its own unique form of trauma, said porn survivor and educator Jewel Baraka. It's gang rape culture in action. We must do more to protect women from the harm of pornography production. Women deserve protection, social support, and real alternatives. Thank you. I'm finished.
All
And
right. So folks that are on the Zoom with us, if you have any questions for Melissa, please put them in the Q&A. We would be happy to answer them. And Melissa, thank you very much for giving that presentation. And I'll take you up on your offer to one of these days do a presentation just on the law side of this and the fights that are in the courts. It's been very interesting. I sat through the French government's presentation yesterday morning. The French Senate put on a presentation at their embassy yesterday. And it was a very interesting presentation. I did not know that in 2023, the French Senate had voted to make violence against women in porn one of their priorities. So I'll be curious to see what legislation comes out of them from that. They've had an age verification law. I learned yesterday from a member of parliament in Sweden, the EU's had some laws around this, but it doesn't look like they're doing much enforcing. So there's always this question of, that we have of how good is it if all you're going to do is pass a law? You need to do the enforcement piece of it, and you need to take some things through the court. So I think that would be a webinar.
Yes, it would. Age verification addresses the social harms of pornography. It fails entirely to address the production harms. And one of the things I love about the French lawsuits and lawsuits against Pornhub and Girls Do Porn is that they're bringing charges of torture, rape, kidnapping, which is what these porn pimps do. They're just like non-porn pimps, if I could say that weird word. But anyway, do we have any questions or anything, Sharon, or comments from anybody?
I don't see any in the Q&A at this time, but y'all are welcome to ask questions of Melissa. She is a foremost researcher, wait a minute, there might be one. Can you describe in more detail who you have ethnographically interviewed? Former prostitutes, pimps, producers, current pornographic answers. That was a question in the Q&A.
I can't recall from memory the exact recruitment materials we used in our interviews, but we opened our interview, we put out announcements in Instagram in Sweden. We put out cards in every agency that women were known to go to who wanted some kind of help around medical care or services or employment. And the recruitment went, have you ever been filmed in prostitution? Have you ever made porn? If so, we'd like to interview you. Please call this number. And we accepted everybody who said that they had had that experience. And I want to make a thank you for the question, because one of the things I want to point out is that we interviewed women who were actively involved in porn production at the time of the interview. And many of them were sex trade advocates. They were members of groups in Sweden that promoted prostitution and pornography. So we were not just interviewing abolitionist survivors, we were interviewing everybody who contacted us and was able to set up a time for a meeting in a coffee shop or parts of 2 different cities in Sweden.
All right.
Actually, 3 different cities. Sorry.
All right, good. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. It's always a pleasure to have you and listen to the latest work out of the Prostitution Research Institute. Now I'd like to introduce Andrea Heinz, and we have a little tech thing that we've got to do here so that Andrea and I are actually in the same room at the moment, even though we're on 2 different computers. So after I introduce her, I'm going to not only mute myself, but turn my sound off so that we don't cause any echo back for the audience today. Andrea is formidable and amazing. I was very gifted yesterday to be able to go with her to the Swedish embassy, who gave an outstanding presentation, multi-panel presentation on prostitution. And I was delighted to learn that Andrea was on the board of an organization that I'll let her tell you a little more about, and that's how we got this invitation. She is a Canadian survivor and outstanding soul and does a ton of advocacy in this area. If you're not following our Twitter, or on X, you're missing something really good. So Andrea, I'm going to let you go, and I will put myself on mute and turn my sound off. All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and I'm really grateful to be in this space, and I give special thanks to my co-presenters for their incredible work in this area. As Sharon said, I am a Canadian woman. I'm an activist from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. This year marks 20 years of my involvement in the area of commercial sexual exploitation and direct engagement with commercial sex offenders, who are sometimes referred to as sex buyers. The vast majority of them were frequent or habitual consumers of pornographic material. I endured 7 years of having my body purchased by them in the licensed and regulated prostitution system, and have now spent over 12 years working alongside men who have been arrested for a prostitution purchasing offense in my country, and who end up going through the Edmonton Sex Trade Offender Program, which I coordinate and facilitate on behalf of my local NGO partners, CEASE. So I do have slides. I will open that now. Okay, you're seeing that?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Okay, so the role of pornography, how its harms are overlooked. I want to begin by just drawing your attention to the origin of the word pornography. So it is the writing of prostitutes. And you'll note that the word prostitute is inherent to the definition. The individuals involved, primarily women, of course, are already labeled and othered from those in the general population. So they are stigmatized and not seen simply as women. So right from the get-go, already treating women in prostitution as different. When we move to the definition of the word pornography, it is printed or visual material containing the explicit description or display of sexual organs or activity intended to stimulate erotic rather than aesthetic or emotional feelings. Here you'll note the differentiation made between stimulation and emotional feelings in the definition. One is singular by nature and only sensory based. The other includes human connection. Pornography typically entails observation rather than engagement. This includes AI-based interactive pornography, as the so-called person on the other end is not in fact real. The only exception to the nature of engagement in pornography is live webcamming, but even that contains a digital divide between the performer of sexual acts and the consumer, the exploiter. So again, dehumanizing people right from the get-go. What we're seeing now, there are shifts in the pornography that have existed over the last handful of decades. Pornography is no longer primarily writings and drawings. With the introduction of visual media and the internet, it is now primarily video-based. Pornographic videos have long dominated the internet, with approximately 25 million pornographic sites now online. Ireland's Sexual Exploitation Research and Policy Institute states that 12% of internet content is pornographic, and that's not including the porn that's on our social media sites. They report that roughly 1/4 of all queries are for porn. With how much content is out there, porn producers have to find a way to stand out. As such, videos have become far more graphic. For example, comparing earlier issues of Playboy magazine to what is seen now, it has moved well beyond topless nudes. That type of content is now considered too tame or boring for the collective tolerance level. As a result of becoming more graphic, it has naturally become more violent. I always say it's not sex that's being shown, but rather filmed acts of sexual violence, given the slapping, spitting, gagging, hair pulling, strangulation, double penetrations, fisting, large object insertions, gangbangs, verbal attacks, and much more. Some studies have found that nearly 90% of pornographic scenes contain one or more acts of sexual assault. More accessible, again, this is largely on account of technological advances and government failures in responding in a proactive manner to consider how these advances impact the porn industry and the general public's access to it. A recent report by San Francisco NGO Common Sense found that 51% of children age 8 and under have their own mobile device, a cell phone or a tablet. The average age of first viewing of pornography is around 12, with some reports identifying children as young as 9. And because so little has been done in response, we now have a severely pornified culture, which we are all being subjected to. And even those who don't, and pornography has become more socially accepted as a result. We are a porn-sick society, and even those who don't consume porn will regularly defend it under the argument of free speech or freedom of expression, as Melissa Farley so eloquently pointed out. Porn and prostitution, again, echoing her words, the only real difference is the visual capture. Porn is filmed prostitution. They both send the same message. Women are available, women are subordinate, and women will be mute. She can be accessed at any time, 24/7 on a whim. She will do what you want regardless, and she will not protest or reveal your actions. I've always liked this quote by John Stoltenberg: pornography tells lies about women, but pornography tells the truth about men. Whether it's prostitution or porn, the inherent misogyny is the same, the sexual entitlement is the same, the violence is the same, the victim blaming and victim shaming is the same. Pornography as propaganda. This is something that's very important that I think we need to focus on. Propaganda, by definition, is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Pornography carries a normative effect and has served to dramatically desensitize society to sexual exploitation and acts of sexual violence. This includes things like child sexual abuse with so-called age play pornography. incest with family-themed pornography. There is dad and babysitter porn. There's prostitution and sex trafficking fetish porn, rape fetishizing porn through sleeping videos and what is being referred to as consensual non-consensual. There is strangulation and smothering porn being termed as breath play, and many more perversions and paraphilias. Anything which is spread so widely and rapidly with no concerted effort to be contained or restricted or even criticized can only have one outcome, and that is a commonly held belief within society's people that it is acceptable and that it causes no serious harms. This has a direct impact on the lives of women and girls in society. All women are affected by a world filled with porn propaganda. The impacts go well beyond the women who are harmed in the production of the videos. Porn's role and purpose in the brothels. For the women, porn exists in those facilities to desensitize them and serves to further normalize the brutalities that they will be expected to endure from commercial sex offenders. For the men, porn is displayed in the waiting rooms and in the private rooms, primarily with the intent to make these offenders ejaculate faster, which in turn achieves a higher turnover rate of paying men. But it also serves to relieve them of any guilt or second guessing that they may experience. Pornography as a form of propaganda plays a key supporting role in the system of prostitution, particularly in brothels. When it is shown, it makes for a far more welcoming environment where sex offenses are shown in the open and without any shame or secrecy. This makes Johns feel less stigmatized and some women less violated. Again, it carries that normative, desensitizing effect. Continuing on with porn's role in brothels, there's definitely a symbiotic relationship between pornography and prostitution. There are requests to record sexual violations. These are very common because men want what they call value for money. They will bring in laptops and phones to show and request specific sexual acts that are shown in pornography. These digital devices are often used by men to secretly film women, either by simply hitting record unbeknownst to her, or by hiding devices in linen shelves, etc. Men will use spy gear, hidden camera items to secretly record women, which includes eyeglasses, watches, necklaces, keychains, pens, and much more. I've had both of these incidences happen to me several times in prostitution where men have hid cameras in the linen shelves, and my so-called quote-unquote best client of 4 years in prostitution was filming me off of a spy gear watch, and I didn't find out until his daughter emailed me to tell me that she found the videos. Finally, pornographers will scout women in and from brothels to produce pornographic content because those women are already porn ready. The internet never forgets. This is really tragic because, we think that we can move on from these things after they happen, but unfortunately there is that digital footprint. Skimmer sites are very popular. These are porn videos rapidly spread like an infectious disease and end up on different websites. While still active in prostitution and deeply captured by sex work ideology, I had posted a short advertising clip, a video on Pornhub, where I was flogging a man with a leather whip while wearing a sexualized outfit. The video ended up on hundreds of different websites within a week. After leaving the prostitution system, I spent hours every single day for several months contacting the websites one by one, many of them headquartered in Russia and the Baltic region. Most of my removal requests went unanswered. These sites want to house as much content as possible, so this is unsurprising. I eventually had to use an online directory called Who Is to find out one by one who owned the individual sites and contact them directly or contact the email listed for their domain providers' abuse and legal departments. Eventually, this strategy worked, and after several months, I was able to remove that advertising video from all of the many hundreds of porn sites, but it was incredibly tedious and incredibly traumatic. I have since since assisted about half a dozen women in doing the same thing, most times with me doing the extensive work required for free to save them that same frustration and trauma. Unfortunately, this does not guarantee that their sexualized content cannot still be found later on screen capture sites like Wayback Machine, for example. Websites must be excluded from Wayback's search results for that to happen, and only the registered owner of the porn site has that ability. As we know, the women depicted in porn are not the ones who own these sites. As a result, women are left feeling exposed, feeling violated, and wondering who knows about their past objectification and exploitation. On several occasions, I have had women tell me, "I feel like I am ruined forever," or "there is no escape." Pornhub has been screen captured by Wayback Machine nearly 135,000 times to date. And as for those of us who were secretly filmed by commercial sex offenders, we don't know where those unlawful recordings ended up. For a very long time after leaving prostitution, I obsessively searched numerous popular porn websites every day for the videos that I knew were made of me by using keyword phrases like tattooed brunette or blue-eyed brunette. I eventually stopped after realizing how futile it was, and after realizing how much the fear and obsession was controlling my day-to-day life. What's being done? What's been done? Not enough. But that's not to say nothing has been done. These are some of the more well-known attempts to control child sexual abuse material and trafficking online. So first one, the Digital Economy Act of 2017 in the UK. This included provisions that would require age verification to access porn sites. Internet service providers were in agreement. This legislation would have covered 95% of homes, but unfortunately it was abandoned in 2019 due to implementation challenges and privacy concerns. Then British Prime Minister David Cameron said way back in 2013, "Free and open internet is vital, but in no other market and with no other industry do we have such an extraordinarily light touch when it comes to protecting our children. In the balance between freedom and responsibility, we have neglected our responsibility to our children." David Cameron's 2013 efforts caught the attention of Canadian Member of Parliament Joyce Smith, who in the same year tried to table a bill for internet service provider opt-in legislation. That unfortunately also never materialized due to privacy pushbacks. In the year prior, Canada had introduced the Protecting Children from Internet Predators Act to try to address child sexual abuse material, but it was abandoned not even 1 year later due to public outcry, which is both unfortunate and shameful. MP Smith in 2013 said of these laws, "We're talking about protecting children. We're not talking about adults. Adults can log into their internet service provider computers, check on the box, and turn off the filter." But the civil liberties groups were very aggressive and successful in thwarting both of these attempts, unfortunately. And if any of you have followed the situation around Pornhub, the largest criminal porn enterprise, which is located in my country in Canada, you too might be wondering how many atrocities might have been avoided had Canada taken these preventive measures back in 2012, 2013, only a few years after Pornhub launched in 2007. Thankfully, we have not lost all the momentum here in Canada. There are 2 Canadian bills mentioned here on my list. They're very promising and would work in harmony to hold exploiters and websites illegally hosting content criminally liable. Unfortunately, the Canadian government is prorogued until March 24th, 2025, given Prime Minister Trudeau's recent resignation as Liberal Party leader. So this means that these bills have been scrapped and will need to go through the entire process of introduction from the start once Parliament resumes. Moving back to the UK, after the failures of the 2017 Digital Economy Act, it appears that there is promise with their Online Safety Act, which became law in October 2023. This legislation legally requires online service providers to protect users from illegal harms by identifying and mitigating risks using designated regulator Ofcom's Illegal Harms Code of Practice. This legislation targets user-to-user providers as well as internet search services. The deadline for providers to complete their illegal content risk assessments is actually 3 days from now, and the implementation of safety measures must be in place by March 17th. So definitely something to watch within this space. France's law mentioned here on the list is a domestic violence-based law, which includes a provision that requires porn websites to implement age verification. Failure to comply can lead to site blocking orders through judicial means. This law uses a double-blind third-party token system to age verify rather than a simple click here if you're over 18 self-declaration, which we know is a very faulty system, useless really. Sites must also ensure that deepfakes are prevented. France's regulation authority, ARCOM, has subsequently issued several warnings to porn sites for noncompliance, including Pornhub, giving them deadlines to comply before facing an outright block in their country. Some sites have been blocked within 48 hours of an ARCOM order. There are, of course, some challenges, though, such as mirror sites, which are websites that are a replica of the original website, but are hosted on a different server or using a different domain name or IP address. But all in all, it seems France is doing great work on this issue, which is great to see and bodes very well with their abolitionist approach to prostitution as well, which they implemented in 2016. Not on this list, but just mentioning many US states are also ramping up restrictions on age verification for porn sites. 20 of them have done so to date, leading Pornhub and other porn websites to block user access to their sites in these states rather than simply complying. While other countries and jurisdictions have not gone as all in as the above named, some other places, for example, Australia, have pushed for voluntary internet service provider filtering, and other places, for example, Utah, where Pornhub is blocked for citizens, have suggested placing warning labels on porn sites. To conclude, the way forward in my perfect world, this is what we would do. We would have a .xxx domain that would mandate that all porn sites are only allowed to operate on that domain. This would have access only through internet service provider opt-in legislation, which effectively would remove the majority of sexually explicit material from the mainstream public internet and the easy reach of minors. In effect, this creates a locked door to a specific room for adults only. The 1 to 2 minute video that I mentioned here, playing in advance of every porn video, would serve to stall porn consumers during their consumption. The video would not be able to be bypassed or skipped, and it would include information about the inherent harms of pornography and sexual exploitation, including sex trafficking. It would also provide access to helplines and information for porn consumers who feel that they are operating from a place of addiction, which we know that many of them are. This 1 to 2 minute delay on every video might just simply annoy people as well, making them feel that it's far too much of a hassle or a buzzkill to continue watching pornography, as it would slow their consumption rate. This could, in effect, support market constriction efforts. Less sex consumers, less production, less supply, less trafficking. Performers retaining copyright to all of the videos that they appear in also shifts the control and ownership to the performer rather than the profiteer. This move would reinforce that one major tenet of sexual consent is that it is ongoing. This active or living consent also supports the right to exit and the right to be forgotten perspective that we are seeing in certain laws and places, such as Hawaii and the EU. Regarding the download button, even the unsavory folks at Pornhub removed the download button. This is a simple act that can be taken, which adds one more restrictive step or nuisance to those who wish to capture and keep what does not belong to them. And finally, criminalizing all deepfakes and the websites that exist solely for that purpose is essential to getting ahead on what has been referred to as the new frontier of violence against women. One's likeness should be protected just the same as their physical person should be. So in a perfect world, we would have abolition of all prostitution, all pornography, but in the meantime, we can take at least these preventative measures. That concludes my slide. I want to thank you very much for your time. My email is available there. I'm available for any questions. And I'd also like to draw your attention to redlightexpose.com, which is a survivor-led international voluntary-based grassroots podcast of 11 of us in 7 different countries who speak about the issues of sexual exploitation regularly. So you can find us there. Thank you very much.
All right.
Mhm.
Okay, hang on, let me put mine back on. Are you down your volume?
Yeah.
Okay, so, first of all, outstanding job. Andrea, I really very appreciative of what you did there. I think it was brilliant. I think I like your legislative agenda, by the way. I might steal some of that from you, at Women's Liberation Front. I think one of the things all three of us would totally be in agreement on is that, porn and prostitution, and they are incredibly linked, are not inevitable. That one of the problems that I think we all are contending with is, especially when you're doing legislation, is you're contending with the fact that, well, it's inevitable, and then how do I curb it? A couple of things occurred to me. One is, if you've ever been in Europe and you've ever seen cigarette packets in Europe, right? They contain ridiculous, horrible pictures, right, of like mouth cancers and premature babies, and I mean, like really gut-wrenching kind of pictures. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to give you, smoking kills, right? Like that's the message there. And so a campaign, at the front end of a video, which by the way is some of what the legislation I'm going to talk about requires, right, is that you get notified at the front end that this causes harm, that there's help available, et cetera. I think that's actually a good one. The .x domain is an interesting concept, right? But it used to be that way. You could not get into the XXX theater, unless you were a certain age, right? And very few women were found in the XXX theater, except the ones on screen, right? So the XXX domain is an interesting approach. This morning there was a story on CNN that was also interesting, in that the tech companies, who we've seen repeatedly, the social media companies particularly, be repeatedly unwilling to do anything, about the material that's proliferating and the targeting of young people, and the exploitation of women. Mark Zuckerberg said, maybe in the App Store, we could force you to, give a profile that says you're of a certain age, certain, et cetera. And then only then would you be able to get to apps where you could download things that are XXX kind of material. And that's the first time he's offered that. Up until now, the tech companies have been notoriously squishy on doing, just resistant to doing anything in that domain. So, all right, if you have questions for Andrea, please type them in the Q&A, and we would love to share them. There is one from a Cheryl Johnson. I'm probably going to end up answering part of it. Is there any way we can encourage social media sites to pull down pornography and stop shadow banning genuine sexual around the body, like healthcare and intimacy, all women, from being banned? So it's very annoying and frustrating. So I don't know. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, Andrea? I'm going to talk to it as well.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the challenge, is trying to find that balance. And referencing again Red Light Expose, we actually had an episode where we discussed that, about how it's very difficult to identify exactly what is obscene material and have a universal agreement on that and apply that whenever we're trying to safeguard people from sexual exploitation, and also give that freedom of sexual expression when it comes to reproductive health, or just simply not oppressing women for, showing some shoulder or their ankles, things like that. So it's very hard. I don't really have an answer, unfortunately. I think we're all kind of swimming in that sea of frustration, because we're seeing where there seems to be a lot of support to platform pornographic content, but then you'll see a breastfeeding image being blocked as well. So yeah, I think all that we can keep doing is trying to sound the alarm, unfortunately, and try to get legislation in place that, better protects women's autonomy, but also recognizes that we are being subjected to sexual exploitation. And unfortunately, I have nothing nice to say about most of the owners of social media websites. I've had my own problems trying to report men who have been aggressively harassing me for several years, to the point that I had to get permanent restraining orders levied against them in my local courts. And Elon Musk took no interest in trying to safeguard any type of social media interaction that was happening, and that was happening on his site. So I don't really have a lot of faith at this point, but I just, stand with everyone who's doing the work. And if I can ever be of any help in any way, please know I am.
Can I say something, Sharon?
Go for it.
I disagree entirely with the concept of obscenity. It gets us into all kinds of moral, religious arguments. But I think that the indicator, a legislative approach, which was introduced long, long ago is to prove harms from pornography. It actually is not that hard to do because the harms are so overwhelming and better documented every year by either researchers or mostly by lawsuits bringing charges against porn pimps. And one comment about in Sweden, they're called nudes. And this is I don't know if you're familiar with the argument that has some truth to it, that stripping is a kind of gateway into more ominous forms of prostitution. Some people have said that. Well, in Sweden, nudes are very clearly the gateway of adolescents, teenagers, who are sexting and sending their boyfriends a picture of pulling their shirt up, etc. That is the gateway into porn production in Sweden. Most of the women got into it via pornography production of these so-called nudes, which are single person images, almost always, of a sexy girl that doesn't have any kind of legal standing as pornography or harmful. So I just wanted to mention those.
All right, much appreciated. All right, so I'm going to share my presentation now, if I can get it to come up. Come on, where you at? I've been having so much trouble with this today, so I hope we will not have problems on this front. Let me know if you can see it. Is it showing up? Okay, great. Okay, so you've heard from Melissa Farley, who's outstanding on prostitution and pornography from the Prostitution Research and Education Institute. You've heard Andrea, who is a survivor and talking about the harms. I think we all three of us would have no question agreeing on the harms. We are in 1,000% alignment on that, and that it's harmful for women. So I'm Sharon Byrne. I'm the executive director of the Women's Liberation Front, and we are a radical feminist organization dedicated to restoring, defending, and advancing the rights of women and girls. We work in three main areas. We advocate for policies that will help women and girls, including in the areas of porn. We provide public education, like what we're doing today, and we go to court. We are ladies who go to court, and we fight things using illegal argument in the court system. So the main policy areas that Women's Liberation Front tackles are, we would like to abolish gender. We would really like to get rid of porn. We want all commercial sexual exploitation of women done away with. So that's surrogacy, prostitution, all of it. We obviously would like to see an end to male violence. And these three things, as you can tell, are all intermingled. Porn, commercial sexual exploitation, male violence, very intermingled right now. They always have been, but particularly in the area of porn, they're ubiquitous. We want to also promote women's ability to achieve reproductive freedom. And that means also, freedom from any coercion on our reproductive status or rights. And of course, at the end of the day, we would like women's self-sovereignty. Women should be free and equal human beings that can walk around and do as they wish without anybody else weighing in on it. So one of our priorities obviously is to abolish porn. So as we've talked in this conversation, you've heard it from Melissa and from Andrea, it has really changed dramatically in the past 3 decades. You might not be spending any time in the online porn world, and your last interaction with porn might have been seeing the odd Playboy or Hustler magazine, but things are different now. Anyone can produce and upload it from anywhere. It's no more about actors in studios, right? The internet is a Wild West with very few controls. So one of the things that has hit us a lot in the United States, and I think it's probably hitting in other countries too, is the difference between what bricks and mortar establishments who feature, stripping or pornographic films or sex materials. If you enter a bricks and mortar establishment, you have to sort of show ID. You don't find a lot of women hanging out in there. There's these sort of established barriers to accessing those materials in a bricks and mortar store. Well, the internet has none of that. That you can look at anything. Any 11-year-old can dial up any rape video that they wish to on their iPad. There are no controls controls, no inhibitions. And social media is the worst. And the way the algorithms work, it's not only can you access it, they target you and they'll show you more and more of it. So this is a very different world than what we knew prior to the internet explosion. And unfortunately, the laws really have not kept up. So we are seeing now an exponential proliferation and dominance of porn depicting violence against women and girls. Somewhere in the conference on the status of women in one of the sessions, I think it was the French session, something like 90% of the material that's out there is showing violence against women and girls. And yesterday in the session that we were at the Swedish embassy, I was appreciative of a gentleman named Ted Bush, who runs a program called A Call to Men, where he's trying to socialize men away from this sort of, seeing women as objects that you do things to, that, you abuse, that you don't value and cherish. And he said, basically, in his view, boys are being trained by porn where, it's very misogynistic and demeaning. And further, they're being trained that women want this. And his feeling, and it's ours too, is that this has to do with how we value women and girls in our society. To the right here is just a screenshot. I just did a quick search of, woman beaten porn. And you can see there's any number of, results to go with that. Pages and pages of results. I've just given you sort of the ones that floated to the top. So you can see that multiple different channels, including our least favorite Pornhub, are hosting these kinds of things. So as we've talked about before, kids are accessing porn at the age of 11 on average, and they are learning that this is how we do sex. I actually sat in a bill testimony in New Mexico for some porn restriction legislation, and you would not believe the number of advocates that showed up that said, if they couldn't watch porn, how would they learn to do sex? I don't know how humans have made it on the planet for all this millennia without online videos to look at and somehow managed to reproduce, but that was the argument that was used to try to kill that bill. So young kids can watch rape videos, human trafficking, child assaults. William Christoph did a really good article on this called Children of Pornhub, probably about 5 years ago now. And he detailed how absolutely awful some of these videos were and that anyone can watch them. The porn sites themselves take no accountability. If you're not familiar with Layla McElwait's work, a fellow Canadian of yours, I think, Andrea, she is single-handedly trying to take down Pornhub, and she's doing a hell of a job. There have been multiple lawsuits filed against them for hosting rape videos. Police have called them and said, please take this down. We're trying to prosecute this case. Unfortunately, as we've learned the horrible way is that because of the ability to easily download or screen capture those videos, they show up all over the place. So even if you can get it taken down once, you have no guarantee that it will stay down. It could be hosted on any other site. Social media platforms have been super loath to take any accountability. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a case that's been filed against Meta on that front. And device manufacturers have similarly been unwilling, other than Zuckerberg of Meta this morning signaling that the App Store might be willing to take some accountability. Device manufacturers have not been willing to do anything about this at all either. So we also have seen an article that came out about 2 or 3 months ago where Pornhub in particular, but other sites, were actually going to try to influence the sexuality of their viewers, right, through an algorithm. So you can see here to the right that Pornhub's executives decided they were going to push more trans porn on straight men to see if they could change their sexuality. And they found out that the more that they pushed it on men, the more men watched it. And you know how these algorithms work. What you tend to look at, they show you more of, right? So if you've never done this experiment, go to sleep, leaving, your YouTube feed up and let it just keep rolling. And you'll find that you might have been looking at, videos of antelopes and, kind of their natural environment. You wake up the next morning and it's showing you some god awful basically porn, and that's the way the algorithms work. They just roll right automatically. So it assumes if you keep looking at it, then you must like that, and it will start to amplify that and show you more of it. So there have been changes in what I would call the collective consciousness, the consciousness that we all share, as a society, from porn being so ubiquitous. So one of the first things that's happened is the UK did a big report on this last year that girls are turning up in their ERs with choke marks and anal tearing. This was brought up also in the Swedish session yesterday and the French session. And that is because their boyfriends are seeing this stuff on porn and thinking that this is how we do sex. And so these girls are wondering why they don't like sex. And as Andrea mentioned, breath play, as they call it, where they choke you on camera until the point of losing consciousness. I mean, what a sanitizing term for strangling someone, right? That is the most sanitizing term I've ever, makes it sound almost harmless, and just so not harmless. But this teaches, boys that women and girls are just objects you do things to. And, some of the boys reported too that, well, the women seem to enjoy that, right? The girls in porn like it. So, why don't you? And, honestly, things like OnlyFans, and what we saw with the Giselle Pellico case last autumn was so sickening. And her husband filmed every time he brought over men to rape her while he had drugged her unconscious. And he had all those films, right? And, just the way that it is so dehumanizing and so desensitizing. So, OnlyFans has its own problem too, right? That, the women that are supposedly liberated, if you want to, or promised that they will be liberated and empowered to do their OnlyFans channel, they find like, what is her name, Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue, they have to do ever more outrageous acts, ever more dehumanizing things in order to get the eyeballs to monetize their channel. So there is no empowerment in that, and there is no liberation in that. The other thing that we see is that there are new frontiers. So recently, the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, Reem El-Salem, who we are huge fans of and feel that she is the finest women's rights advocate fielded by the UN to date, she put out a request for input on new frontiers in violence against women and girls. And so we responded, and some of our input included the AI deepfake porn that has really started taking off in the last year and a half to 2 years. There is vengeance and revenge porn, right, where people have taken pictures of you, nude, and then used that to get revenge on you after you break up with them or leave them. Porn is prostitution that's been filmed, as Melissa pointed out. Even though prostitution is illegal in Sweden, if you catch it on camera, it's now merely porn and it's not prostitution anymore. And I did get an earful from a Swedish minister of parliament yesterday. She's very angry that that is the way that law works and wants to fix it, which I know will make Melissa happy. And then there's the inability of enforcement to get these rape and assault videos taken down, even while they're actively prosecuting a rape or sexual assault case. Something new on the horizon is sextortion, and this is just horrible. It's basically where you get forced into doing sexual acts, and the mere act of being forced into doing those sexual acts that were then caught on film forces you into more and degrading sexual acts. So we are just starting legislatively to tackle some of these frontiers. So I'm going to share some of that legislation. But I want to note that all of these leverage a lack of consent, right? They're all these forms I've just talked about. These are all, no one consented to this. There is no consent here. And the tech platforms that will not police the material that they enable or distribute, they act like they are blank channels that anything can be put on, and they will not take any responsibility for that. Although we have all seen with American politics in particular recently, but I think also international politics, sometimes they do police content on their sites, just not pornographic content, which again, if we value and cherish women and girls, we would stand in outrage over this, that, wow, I can't say hurty words on Facebook about a political party, but, people are free to distribute nude photos of me. Who is, being protected here? So let's talk about some of the legislative approaches. So I'm an American, obviously, and I'm working in American politics, and we are working across several states right now on some legislative approaches. So I will tell you a couple of things that I've seen. One is the notion of consent, and that consent to appear in porn and consent to be in sex acts must be legislated, and it must be enforced. And consent has three portions to it. It must be affirmed, meaning that the person clearly said yes, not that they didn't say no, which is kind of the American standard. It really needs to be an affirmed yes, that it was a clear and present yes, not a, well, I kind of thought she was okay with it. It needs to be informed, meaning the person cannot be drugged or, medicated or inebriated in any way. They have to be, able to give that consent. So it must be informed, and it must be freely given and not coerced. And we have also seen approaches to try to get device manufacturers to control access. That has gone nowhere in this country. We have seen approaches to looking at filtering and boosting filters, and the filters are always, a year or two behind where the content has gone, which in internet time is a million years behind where the content has gone. So the filtering is just not going to work as an approach. And then we've looked at age verification laws, which is having some significant impact in the United States. So on consent laws, there's a couple that are out there right now. One is Spain's Only Yes is Yes, a law with mixed results passed in 2022. In that law, it basically says as a rape defendant, you must prove that the victim said yes. Would love to see something like that in the United States, but we start with the presumption of innocence, so we would not be able to do something like that. But California did do something similar. It only applies to college campuses. This law was passed about 10 years ago. And basically it puts an onus on the universities of California that receive state funding that you will have a policy and you will educate students that consent must be affirmed, it must be informed, and it can't be coerced. So that only applies to universities, but that is one of the consent laws that's on the books. There are too few approaches right now, and they're all focused on sex acts and for prosecution of rape. But AI porn, sextortion, revenge porn, this has all caught everyone by surprise. Legislations has just not caught up to it. And we know that 96% of deepfake AI porn images are not consensual. In fact, they're being used deliberately to hurt, particularly a woman. And so there are some promising enforcement efforts out of France on their age and consent laws, but more is needed. And we really want to look at shifting consent to the forefront of policy, and that applies to sex acts, assaults, images, videos, and more. That it needs to just stop being assumed that consent is not important here. I think consent is very important. So from the age verification laws, this is, as I often say in the legislative approach, sometimes we can't get everything we want, but we can get something that's good enough. So age verification laws are not perfect, but they're a good enough law to start making a dent. They define obscene pornographic material. They aim to shield minors from accessing them, requiring age verification. Now that age verification can be done on the website itself, or it can be done by a third party. And I've actually listened to some of the third parties testify in legislative hearings, and boy, they're pretty sophisticated, and they will not store your data, which is always a First Amendment concern in America. Tools are provided by the third parties who do not keep it, and they also help with liability claims, so and government oversight. So a third party can be kind of helpful if you're in the business of showing something that requires age verification. Now, some of the state laws that we've seen pass include a right of action to sue a porn provider or a purveyor by a private citizen. So it pretty much sets up an easy path to a lawsuit for liability for the porn provider, and that is powerful. So, sometimes a question comes up with age verification, who's doing the enforcing? Well, if the Attorney General, he might want to do it, and some do, but it also leaves it wide open for a private citizen in a state with age verification laws to go to court against the porn provider and have a pretty easy case for winning about the harms. So that's pretty good. So this age verification bill tracker, I just want to point out to you, I've stolen off the Free Speech Coalition's website. Free Speech Coalition is a proxy for Pornhub, and they are fighting all of these age verification laws in the court. So everything you see in red is where these age verification laws have passed. And as Andrea noted, 20 have passed so far, and we've been active at Women's Liberation Front in getting those passed, and we have more we would like to do. There's a possibility for one in Pennsylvania this year and also in Alaska, so we're excited about that, possibly Colorado. The bill in California failed, unfortunately, but we will not stop trying. The United States Congress has also attempted this with the Screen Act, which is again aimed at age verification. That act has been introduced, I want to say 3 or 4 times now, and has failed at the national level, which is kind of leaving it to a state by state fight at this point. Now, one of the laws that was passed, which is in Texas, was contested before the Supreme Court. And we filed an amicus brief. Women's Liberation Front submitted an amicus brief in support of Texas's laws, which does include that private right of action to sue. I listened to that Supreme Court hearing. They don't let you watch them on video, but you can listen on audio. And I am not a lawyer, but I had a great one sitting on with me who's also a retired justice, and she's on our board, Elspeth Seifer. And we talked after the call, and just to confirm that we'd heard sort of the same things. Watching the justices question this was very interesting, and they immediately recognized that content filtering did not work, that it was too far behind porn industry as it is, and that the technology just can't keep up with how fast it's moving. The porn industry suggested that parents really should be in control here and educate their children, and that an age verification law was not needed. To which the justices laughed and said, how many parents do you know that can out-tech their 14-year-olds and, keep up on top of them 24 hours a day? So it felt to us like the Supreme Court was likely to leave Texas's law at least partially intact. They may subject it to strict scrutiny and ask for the lower court to have another look at it, but it felt to us like they were positively favorable. The other thing that was interesting was that they cast around, various justices looked around for what is a precedent here that we could lean on, and there isn't one. The closest thing they had was a 1990s case of a bookstore seller who was mad that he didn't have the ability to sell his pornographic materials to kids. So that was the only precedent that they really had to sort of lean back on. There was nothing in the internet space. So it's widely recognized that, the industry, the Wild West porn industry online has moved way faster than the state's abilities to keep up. So after the law took effect in Louisiana, that was the first state to pass it. And I should point out for the record, it is strange to note that across the states that have passed this law, it has almost 100% been pushed by Republican women. I do not know exactly why that's happening, but that is the way that is how this law is getting made, is Republican women in these various state legislatures are the ones pushing it forward. So after it passed in Louisiana, and it was a Republican female legislator that pushed it in Louisiana, I do not know how she got her male counterparts to sign on to it, but she did. Pornhub said that after it had passed, Pornhub themselves reported that they had an 80% drop in access to view porn from residents living in Louisiana. And when they looked a little further into this, they discovered that it wasn't just an age verification thing. It was that Louisiana forced you to go through the Louisiana Department of Motor Vehicles to verify your age. And so viewers who would be looking at that porn decided that they did not want to do that, and they didn't want anyone to know what they might be looking at, so they just quit looking. So it's quite the chilling effect. And so Pornhub decided to block every state that passed this law and sue those states in court. So it has sued Louisiana. I think that case went nowhere. I think it sued Utah as well. Texas, the appeals court found that Texas law was just fine. And Free Speech Coalition, the proxy for Pornhub, has appealed that to the Supreme Court, and we heard that case in January. So we will find out probably in June or later this year how the Supreme Court is going to rule on Texas's law. There's another approach, which is the take it down approach, and I've been very supportive of this. Those of you in the United States that are watching this, your senator voted for this. It passed unanimously in the Senate last month. So take it down is designed to protect women mainly from being victims of non-consensual sharing of sexually explicit images and deep fake porn. So this is an attempt to protect people who are being, have their images used in deepfake porn. It makes it unlawful to knowingly publish a non-consensual intimate image, including digital forgeries created with AI, and it requires social media and similar websites to have in place procedures to remove such content upon notification from a victim. As I said, it's passed the Senate. This is its second attempt at passage in the United States. It failed last year. So now it's over to the House, and we will see what happens with it. There are some other approaches, and in the Q&A, we heard one, a question around this. So several attorneys general, I believe 26 United States attorneys general from different states are suing Meta for causing harm to children through their algorithms and, causing a lot of mental health issues. So it is starting to get more known, I think, that social media is very harmful to kids. But Raul Torres, who is the New Mexico Attorney General, is specifically suing Meta because he carried out an undercover investigation last year and created some decoy accounts of kids, 14 years old and under. And it said it was astonishing. It was like literally minutes where they were contacted, these accounts, having expressed no interest in sexual content, right? So they set up a profile like a 14-year-old girl, expressing no interest in pornographic content whatsoever, and immediately start getting hit on. And, everything from guiding to pedophile chat rooms to being shown pornographic material, to being contacted, groomed, you name it. So he was quite astonished by this. So he is waging a lawsuit against Meta. So to the question of, if you can't get it legislatively done, are there other approaches? Yes, there's always litigation. So I want to thank you for being with us. And I know this is difficult material to process and sit through, but thank you very much for joining us for this. You're welcome to look at our website. We have materials about this at womensliberationfront.org. I think I put my email in the chat. And I just want to thank the panelists very much for joining me on this. I think we got another couple of Q&As in here. And then any final thoughts, questions? Andrea or Melissa?
Just I'd love to hear the questions, and I'm sure, or comments or anything. What about you, Andrea?
Yeah, I think I'm good for what I said. I think I covered what I wanted to cover, but happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. And sometimes that helps to spur some new conversation. Because off the top of my head, I think I don't have anything more.
Oh, you may be able to get this.
You're muted,
I
Sharon.
think your CEASE is pretty good, aren't they?
Yeah, so CEASE is the Center to Empower All Survivors of Exploitation and Trafficking, and that's in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So they definitely do a lot of exit service provision work, but as we know, it's very complex, it's very long-term, but they do offer bursaries, they offer access to counseling, peer support, all those types of things that people need, but it's very challenging. Like in Canada, even though we've had an equality model since 2014 surrounding prostitution, we still have not had adequate funding delivered to our NGOs, which I think is pretty universal in most places, it seems. It doesn't seem like women's liberation and our well-being is funded adequately in many places. But in Canada, we were promised that there would be adequate funding for exit service provision to help women leave situations of commercial sexual exploitation. And we just have not seen that. So there's a lot of organizations that are doing the work and trying to support the women. Vancouver Rape Relief, Laclay, Reset Society as well. But again, everybody's just really needing more, definitely lots more.
And Susan,
I
I'm
mean,
not sure where
I'm
you're
sure.
located at. Oh, Dr. Farley, did you want to talk for a second?
Well, I'm sure we'll get into this in the panel next week on prostitution, but I would like to say, to follow up with what Andrea just said, I'm 100% in agreement that there is an urgent priority for funding for exit services. And I would suggest that all prostitution exit services should be advertising special support groups for women who are specifically trying to exit porn and want to talk about that. Just get that highlighted in your mission statements, services offered in every survivor exit program. And that said, the United States is currently destroying the social support system for vulnerable human beings in our country. And At the very bottom of the list are survivors who are seeking to exit the sex trade. And it is an urgent priority. And I would just urge awareness and support for those of us who are going for legislative responses, either arresting sex buyers or arresting porn users when porn, bringing criminal charges against them. That does impact, we can't deny it, that impacts the cash reserves of survivors. End of story. They need more alternatives and support. And number one, housing, 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 every place in the world, housing support. So I'll stop there, but please focus on survivor services at the top of the legislative list.
I 1000% agree. We will be doing, just for everyone on this call, we will be doing a session on prostitution and looking at similar solutions there. So Melissa's given you a bit of a preview, but not the whole game away. So that will be on the 18th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. So, and we will have Anna Zabnina of European Migrant Women's Network joining us. And there is a host of challenges in trying to get women out of prostitution in Europe. So I want to also talk a little bit more about Susan's question, though, because she asked something, she's asked something interesting there, which is how do we support legislation? So you have a number of ways to do that. First of all, you are welcome to get on Women's Liberation Front email list. We will very often send you a call to action saying, please contact your legislator about this, right? So we do that very much state specific, but we also do national calls to action. If you become one of the Wolf's Sisters in Action, we will train you on how to track legislation and how to advocate before state legislatures. And I have to tell you, I've been giving a lot of testimony before state legislatures lately and would love to have others joining. So that would be super helpful if you would like to do that. You can also reach out to your own state legislator and your United States representatives, and you can do this in other countries too. You can reach out to your member of parliament and say, I'd like to see you propose this kind of law. I'm one of your constituents, and I'd like to see you push this kind of law. I'd like to see you support. So for example, we will be talking about the equality model next week in our session, but you can, if you are concerned about pornography distribution in your own country, you can reach out to your member of government and say, I'm your constituent, and I would really like to see you propose this kind of legislation. And you can contact these women and you're welcome to send them to us, for more information. So we would be happy to do that. But yeah, we do a lot of legislative advocacy at Women's Liberation Front. So we're happy to do that. Okay. And then Lucy had if you were to individually summarize the best way to support the research, advocates, and policy, how would each of your best, how would you support your efforts? I will tell you, and I will let my compadres here on the panel weigh in too. When it comes to nonprofit funding, you're probably not aware, but only 2% goes to women, that women's issues, women's groups, women's orgs. And you can imagine that from women's health to all kinds of, different concerns, that is a tiny, tiny, tiny bucket of funding to work with. I want to point out too that, we're talking about this and we are at the conference on the status of women, but prostitution and porn are not a woman's problem. I mean, they are our problem, but we should not be the only ones who care about this. That obviously the consumer here needs to enter the stage, and that is males, right? And the lens needs to be turned on who it is that is creating the demand that fuels this, right? So, women will not be able to abolish this by ourselves. It's going to take really a shift in society to do this. And we would love to see that shift. So I'd be curious, Melissa and Andrea, if you'd like to talk about what are the best ways to support your efforts. Obviously, donate to the orgs making a difference, right? Support survivors and do what we can, but in push legislation that helps get at demand. That seems to be one of the best tools we have is to get at demand reduction. But I'd love to hear what you two have to say.
Sure. wait for Sharon to turn down her volume
Got
as we try to go back and forth. Yeah, I echo a lot of what Sharon just said. I think what's really important is to give targeted donations to NGOs, because a lot of times NGOs do have, you know, administrative costs, and of course they need to cover those. But if you specify in your donation to your local end demand NGO that you want it to go specifically to, you know, an end demand campaign or to survivor supports or exit opportunities, anything like that, they actually have to then allocate those resources directly to that. So I think that that's really important, because if not, you don't really know where your money will go. And it's not to say that they're not doing great work all around, but if you're really focused on one outcome, one goal, that's a good way to do it. I also really want to encourage women just to organize. So many women are disconnected. We're operating in silos and we're not coming together. You know, you look back to the late 80s and the early 90s, like women were on doorsteps of legislative buildings. They were doing protests, they were doing marches. There was a lot more, it seemed, fire in the belly of women out there. And you know, I know we've been beaten down literally and figuratively for so long that it's very hard, and people are living in, you know, worse economic situations than ever. So it's making it harder to donate. It's harder to donate your time even to do these things. But when we are connected and we are operating together, we're much stronger. So organize with women, form a local group in your area if you're not already aware of one. You know, connect with whoever is closest by you, and try to basically sound that alarm, and, you know, do fundraisers, do the work. It's a lot of work, but it has really good outcomes when we do it.
I would say very strongly that there is no such thing as one solution to this problem. And I feel that it's like asking, what do we need to do to solve climate warming? That's an impossible thing. There are 10 highly urgent things that need to be done. You choose, whoever's listening, you choose based on your passion, your interest, and your expertise, and your ability to connect with the kinds of people that Sharon and Andrea both talked with. So there's not one solution. There's an urgent need. We are drowning in wealth, in propaganda. We are opposed by gazillionaires, you know, and the propaganda goes very, very deep. Wikipedia, just as one tiny example, Wikipedia was founded by Jimmy Wales, who made his fortune in escort prostitution websites. This is the man who is driving the information that young people and even law students. I had a fit one day. A law student gave me a bunch of sites to Wikipedia. I said, no, no, and no. You go to, have you ever heard the L word, library? Go to the library, not Wikipedia. Anyway, that's the kind of propaganda bias we're all up against. Free speech, and the Free Speech Coalition has been around for about 30 or 40 years. They started at the dawn of the internet, representing, like you said, Sharon, the interests of pornographers. So there's an urgent need for research to counter that. There's tiny amounts of funding for research. There's not enough funding for survivor exit programs. Get to know your local politicians. I mean, local city council members, sheriff. Who are the local people? Know what they're doing and what they're not doing. In my county where I live, the sheriff was arrested for buying sex in Las Vegas, at a brothel that was 100% monolingual Chinese speaking women, obviously trafficked. It's been years of people fighting to get this guy fired. He isn't fired yet. We're in the we're primitive species, us humans. We're a very primitive species, and it's never been more evident than right now. So I would say the long-term goal is eliminating poverty, eliminating colonialism and racism, and eliminating sex discrimination. Once there's equality of economic, race, and sex equality, there won't be a problem of prostitution because no women are going to enter the sex trade. So,
All right, on that
thank
lofty
you, Sharon.
aspiration for humanity. We will sign off, and I hope to see everybody at our session next week on prostitution on the 18th. And thank you all for joining us. Much appreciated. Bye.